is time once again for CU Immigration Forum here on WRFU LP, Urbana, 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. I would also like for you to understand that views expressed are those of the speakers, and I further would like to inform you that those views are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, or the Urbana Socialist Forum, or, as we like to say on the TV version of this show, UPTV. These views are our own, and by our in this instance, I mean myself and my charming guest, Dr. Professor. Wait, I'm sorry, I didn't have your microphone on. What?
You can say Professor as
Professor?
well.
You like Professor? Dr.
Sure.
Stacy Harwood. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you?
Good.
Are you enjoying the cold weather?
No, I'm not.
No? What?
I'm not liking it at all.
Really? That's so strange. I'm not quite sure how I can even talk to you. You're not liking the cold weather.
Yeah. Miserable.
I'm not surprised. Well, where are you from originally? I don't think I know this.
Oh, I'm from California originally.
Aha. That might have something to do with your dislike of the cold weather.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I didn't own winter clothes before I moved here.
So have you sort of gotten used to it to the point where it's just like,
Yeah. I've lived here since 2001, so.
Yeah. So it's not
I'm equipped. I have the, gloves, boots, hat, and all that, the gear.
The down
Exactly.
jacket.
Exactly.
Puffy. Where's your coat?
It's over there.
Yeah, so it's one of those quilted things with stuffing in it. And, So from California to here, was it the job that brought you here?
Yeah, I got a job at the university, and I moved here.
And then you said, "Oh my God, it's cold." Man.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
You
knew it.
Yeah, I knew what I was getting into.
Right.
So.
That's good. Some people don't. They come here and they've heard of winter, but it's this idealized thing where there's snow and it's kind of like cold and you bundle up and you can see your breath, but it's, you're cold like your nose is cold.
Yeah. Well, when I interviewed for the job, it was February, so I got a real good taste of winter. So even before I got the offer, I kind of knew what winter was like. So.
I have some sense of this, yeah. Do you find yourself yearning for California?
In the winter, I do. Actually, more in the spring, because I'm tired of the cold, so I'm not quite at the yearning stage yet of the year. So,
right. Well, another week. Let's see, this is, at least another week or so. You will be...
Well, I go visit, so
beginning
I get my little West Coast fix a couple times a year. So,
Northern or Southern?
I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. So.
So you know the chilliness. You know what it's like to be chilly.
Yeah.
I was last time I was in San Francisco, it was in August. I was freezing.
Yeah, it's a fog.
It was the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
I went out there going, it's August, all right, whatever, shorts, T-shirt. I was freezing. I had to go to like a Goodwill or something and buy a coat.
Yeah, it's humid too, so it kind of gets under your skin.
Yeah, it was an education to me that even if you share a season and hemisphere, that doesn't necessarily mean that you share weather.
No,
at all. Anyway, this is neither here nor there.
Yes.
You were asking about the camera earlier.
Yes.
There it is. That's the TV viewing audience. And in case you want to acknowledge them in some way,
hey, audience.
point your finger and say, you better, you can do that. Otherwise, if you want to be heard, you kind of have to talk to them. You can sort of do both. I have to do this weird swivel thing. So it's strange. We're working out the bugs here. It used to be, you were on Ricardo's show before, yeah. So you remember what that was like.
Right.
And that was actually a little more intimidating, kind of, if I remember correctly, because you're sort of at one end of this long room and there were these bright lights and camera and there's somebody sitting there kind of just out of eyesight,
Yeah, it was fun, but it's a little tight too.
Yeah.
Around a little table and, but, no, Ricardo was great, so he made the group feel comfortable and it was fun.
Yeah, that's good.
So, yeah.
So by group, you mean
Oh, my students.
Your students, right. So I guess since we talked about you working at the university and being a professor, we should talk about what it is you profess.
Right. So I teach in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. And I teach courses related to community development, neighborhood revitalization, and some other things, but those are the fun ones.
Community development and neighborhood revitalization. So those could mean the same kind of thing, and they could mean something completely different.
Right. Well, they're overlapping. The neighborhood class kind of takes a neighborhood angle. But some of the stuff that we do in the community development course doesn't necessarily revolve around a neighborhood. So this semester our work isn't neighborhood focused, and it's in a course called Community Development Workshop. So they're related. There's slightly different ways. One class is a little bit more traditional, like you have readings and discussion, and the workshop's more hands-on. So the format's a little bit different too.
So there are two words here that seem like key words: community and neighborhood. If you had to, for the layman, define what each of those words means, how would you do it?
Okay. Well, it depends. So neighborhood, has a physical geography, right? And so it could just be a physical boundary, and it could have a community, a sense of connectedness, sense of belonging, but it doesn't have to. So sometimes people use the terms interchangeably, but for me they're really distinct. So community is about some kind of connection to a group of people or a place. And so it can overlap with neighborhood, but not always. Does that make sense for the...
Well, it sort of does. So a neighborhood is an area. That is arbitrary area. So you can decide that, say, let's say this trailer park is a neighborhood, or you can say the area between the park and the school is a neighborhood.
Well, it depends who's defining it. So if the residents can define their neighborhood, and sometimes the neighborhood has different boundaries depending on who you ask. Oftentimes local governments will have kind of a formal boundary for a neighborhood. So there's some variation, but typically neighborhoods are defined by often like a busy road might create a boundary, or some kind of river, or the changing in the land use, like a neighborhood could have single-family homes, and then all of a sudden you get into more of a mixed use or a downtown. So the sort of some natural and use boundaries that oftentimes people sort of feel that the neighborhood ends when there's some kind of change or shift. Could be different kinds of people in one area, and then as it changes into another area, people then define a neighborhood like, well, this neighborhood is where could be like a higher income or lower income, or it could be defined by race or ethnicity. So there's no set rule.
Well,
it varies.
Sure, how that was,
We talk all about that in the class. Of the sort of boundaries and how they're defined and created.
Partly the reason I ask is because since this is the immigration show and we're talking about immigration, one of the topics that comes up a lot is the quote-unquote immigrant community. And the analogy I made today, I was talking to this class about what Immigration Forum does and that sort of thing. And the analogy I made for them was like, about getting involved in things, how people think in terms of getting involved. If somebody came into the room, like right now, and said, oh my God, downtown Champaign had an earthquake and all the buildings have collapsed and we need people to come and help, search for survivors, it would be easy for us to go, okay, show is over. We hop in our cars, drive there, and we know where we're going and what we're doing once we get there. But if somebody came in and said, oh my God, there's a crisis in the immigrant community, we need people to help out, it's like, where do you go? What is the immigrant community?
It's dispersed, and there's clusters, and certain areas are known to have immigrants, but it's not clear which immigrant community are we talking about.
So community in that usage, and possibly in the way you use it, means a group defined by a common
often
problem,
or
attribute.
Right. A lot of times shared history, shared language, and so one might belong to multiple immigrant communities, right? Like, I feel I'm part of this one because I speak the same language, but then I connect with this one because we have a similar, we come from the same town, so there's lots of different sub-communities. So, yeah, I mean, saying the immigrant community is kind of a catch-all, and it depends who you ask, they might imagine it differently.
Yeah, and that's the thing about words that is tricky, is it helps to have kind of clear ideas of what words mean, at least when you're using them. Yeah. Because I know I use the word community in a lot of different ways, a lot of the time. And it's a shortcut for me. It's easier than going, okay, the group of people that blah, blah, blah. I'll just say, the community, the community radio. This is community radio. What does that even mean? I don't know. Is it radio lovers community?
People who listen to the radio.
Yeah. I mean, so there are things like that I find I cringe all the time when I'm talking, particularly on the radio, because it's like you can't stop and explain every single thing you're saying. But at the same time, how do you make these thoughts clear?
Right.
So that's your job. I mean, you're supposed to be able to just do this stuff automatically, right? Make these points clear and define them. And
right. Or at least, I mean, oftentimes there's multiple meanings. And so, figuring out, well, it can mean different things to different people, and just being aware of that then helps one navigate those conversations. And and that's the whole point of the class. We start unpacking these things. Yeah.
And do you find that people come in with preconceived notions about these things, or are they just sort of a blank slate, like they're just sitting there going, I never thought about this before at all, and so anything you tell me is new and it's easy?
I think it's one of those things that, like you say, if you don't take time to think about it, you just sort of use it in a sloppy way. And so in some, just kind of unpacking what those words mean, how they're used in different ways, and how they're actually can distort things and be terms can use to sort of slide over the details and nuances. Right. It just it becomes obvious as we start pulling those things apart, right, in class. But it's not something that in everyday language people are going to be like, what do you mean by community? But then the whole point is that hopefully by the end of the semester they would be asking that question when they hear the word. Right.
So when someone says, well, how are you helping the community?
Yeah, what does that really mean?
What do you mean by
Which community are you talking about? Yeah, exactly.
So, speaking of community, you are a member of the CU Immigration Forum.
I am.
You've been, like, pretty much from as long as I can remember being there, you were there, right?
I was. I think we were talking about that the other night. It was at one of our meetings. 2008 or 2009 when we got started. Informally, we weren't officially CU Immigration Forum, but people were getting together and talking and discussing secure communities.
So how did you become interested in, how does immigration, I guess I should ask the broader question, how does immigration fit in with what you study?
Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. Well, there's a couple ways I can answer it. One is that oftentimes when city governments are planning and doing things, they don't sort of look at just immigrants. They say we're planning for the whole neighborhood or the whole community. And so sort of trying to insert that, maybe you should think about immigrant issues. And so I bring that little piece in, and that's sort of a broader agenda of sort of trying to integrate more, sort of thinking about the diverse populations in a city, right? Not just sort of saying everyone's the same, they need the same things. So I'm interested in immigration and immigrants, so I sort of bring that piece, but other groups, bring in other groups or other issues. So that's one part of planning. The other part is that I do a lot of research on issues related to immigration in cities. So I look at how policies are made and how they impact immigrants or help them integrate or exclude them and that sort of thing. So I have a long-standing research in that area.
So that was always something you were interested in. You didn't just...
I was always fascinated with that, and since way back.
Can you pinpoint a genesis of this interest? Like, one day I was...
Well, actually, this is really interesting. I think when I was living in California, I was getting somewhere around when I was finishing my undergrad, I lived in San Diego, and there were a number of sort of camps in the canyons where migrant laborers were living. And so I was kind of fascinated with that phenomena. Like, how is it that people are camping in these canyons and making little shacks, and it sort of got me thinking, like, can you do that? You know?
Yeah.
And apparently you can't. And so when I got my master's degree, I kind of studied that a little bit and looked at the regulation of those things and the controversy that sort of migrant camps in Southern California. It was very controversial because, you know, some camps had up to 500 people living in them. I mean, they're like villages, and they're all occupying private property, and you know, just, you know, it was there's a humanitarian part of, like, you don't want to just kick people out and tear down their house, but at the same time, someone's like, well, this is my property, and there are people living on it, and they don't have my permission. So I was just really interested in looking at sort of the codes and regulations and the politics around that. And then I just kept looking at different issues I used to have a scrapbook of, like, newspaper articles that I would cut out of the newspaper every time, like, an issue would come up. And I was just really, I didn't know that that's where I was going, but I was just really fascinated with sort of these debates about codes and violations, and, like, people hanging out their clothes, putting them over a shrub, and then there'd be, like, this big uproar about it. And then it got really kind of tied into social class and race and ethnicity and immigration status, and there were just very messy local controversies. So that's that. Yeah, so I was interested in that sort of thing.
So it doesn't have some relation to your own personal history, like,
no,
oh, we were immigrants, or, you know.
No. No, I mean, I grew up in a very diverse, you know, community, and immigration was always around me, but yeah, code violations and, you know, that wasn't something that I personally was experienced. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting the ways that law is used, and I think this has come up a lot in the last year or so, particularly when you know, with police shootings and things like that, where people are starting to say, take a look at stuff like that and say, well, the law is being applied unevenly in different communities. And so you'll have people defending things like police shootings in particular, saying, well, if they obeyed the law, and, you know, naturally there are more police there because there's more crime there and all this stuff. And it's like, it's an interesting conversation. It was because the more you start thinking about it, the more you realize, like, any community of people, and I'm using the word community in the sort of neighborhood sense here, both neighborhood and like-minded group of, or, you know, people with shared history. If you police them as heavily as the police do in some neighborhoods, you're going to have a lot of crime, a lot of people being arrested for, or picked up, or questioned, or whatever, for a lot of different things, and it will seem like this is a high crime area, no matter where it is, what community, it doesn't matter who it is. If you focus that kind of attention on them, you'll find a lot that seems wrong, and then suddenly it'll be like, well, those people over there, whoa, they're really, you know, a dangerous mud. So it's interesting the way immigration and codes and things like that bump up against each other, because here again, it is a way of policing a group of people in to an extraordinary extent.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have been writing about this more so now, and talking about how the idea of the border moving inside the interior, and that cities are creating borders by setting new laws and restricting, saying, you know, you can't rent to anyone who doesn't have documentation, and basically saying that you can't live in a community unless you have documentation. And of course, these things are not allowed to do that, but they're still trying to. And so there's been a lot of discussion about, you know, individual cities creating their own borders, their own sort of border patrol. And
that was what we discovered when we were looking into secure communities at the beginning. For those who don't know, secure communities was a program instituted by the government that ostensibly was designed to identify criminal aliens and prioritize them for deportation, right? That's pretty much what the
right.
program was supposed to be. What it was doing in actual point of fact was anybody that had any brush with the law was potentially being swept up in this program. Plus, it was sort of unconsciously or maybe consciously deputizing local law enforcement to act as immigration enforcers. So they saw their job as, oh, I'm looking for illegals. And so you had a lot of profiling. Like,
racial
hey,
profiling,
this person doesn't speak much English and they look different, and therefore I'm going to ask them for ID that I wouldn't ask them for otherwise, and then they're not going to have it, and therefore I'm taking them to jail, and then blah, blah, blah. So I've forgotten what my point was now. Oh, it was about secure communities.
And just sort of this border, cities creating their own borders.
The enforcement thing, and that was my point, was that it sort of created borders all over the place, and it created a border patrol that was pretty much across the country.
Yeah, and it really varied a lot. Some cities were more gung-ho and very more sort of, hey, we're going to deal with this undocumented thing, and became really aggressive about it. Whereas other communities, it wasn't as severe, but a lot of people were still getting caught up. Like, if you didn't have your driver's license when you were driving and you got pulled over, you were basically arrested and brought to jail. Yeah. And normally that doesn't happen. I mean, and so people who were otherwise not doing anything wrong were getting put in jail for not having a license, which doesn't seem like a major crime nor a reason to put someone in jail.
No,
so
not necessarily. Unless you're looking for a reason.
Right, exactly.
And a lot of people were looking for a reason, and still are looking for reasons.
Right.
And
yeah, the odds of getting pulled over, a white person versus a person of color, the person of color is more likely, and so immigrants who are darker were getting pulled over. And so it's like, I'm following the law, I'm not speeding, I have my taillights working, yet I'm still getting pulled over. And that, I mean, that happened here too. Yeah. So, not to the extent of in other places, but I mean, we had cases where people were put in jail basically for that.
So how do you untangle that? Like so you've got the border is thickening and it's everywhere, and all this stuff going on, and people are using the existing laws in creative ways to use them as enforcement mechanisms and to identify. I mean, they're used to create otherness. I mean, if someone's lack of language skills or looking different or whatever isn't enough, we're creating laws or we're utilizing laws to create otherness.
Yeah. Well, a lot of places those laws have been challenged in court and have been thrown out. So some places know that it's not going to hold. It's more of a political stance. Yeah. And sort of putting the word out like, you're not welcome here. Yeah. And sometimes what happens in some cases that people just move away because they don't want to live in a place that feels hostile, right? And so other places have been actually welcoming immigrants, sort of taking the other side, right? Of like, well, we'll take them. And so you see that a lot in the sort of Rust Belt cities in the Midwest. More of a, it's not like everyone welcomes, but there's more of a formal welcoming and like an attempt to make people feel comfortable and help with integration into a new community. So you see kind of that's been like the swinging back that way a little bit. Like I've heard some communities call themselves the anti-Alabama state because like in opposition to what some of the anti-immigrant things Alabama was doing, they're trying to pitch themselves as more immigrant-friendly or welcoming. Yeah. So you have, right now it's kind of an interesting moment where there's a lot of talk about welcoming immigrants, more so than, say, the last 20 years. Yeah. So I've been kind of finding that to be pretty interesting and thinking about, well, what does that look like? How does one be welcoming? And, what does that look like exactly? Yeah. Right.
You've done a lot of work in this area, haven't you?
Well, it's kind of a new project, actually, for me. I've been actually interviewing places all over the Midwest, asking them about like what they're doing and how it's playing out. I've been focusing a lot on the what urban planners are doing in particular, but I'm learning a lot about, all kinds of activities and programs that cities are unfolding. So,
well, maybe I should ask this. This is probably a stupid question, but what does an urban planner do, like from day to day?
Oh my goodness, it's such a hard question.
If that were your job, I mean, you're a professor, but let's say the city.
Well, I mean, it's really,
hired you to be an urban planner.
It's super interdisciplinary. A lot of urban planners work for local government, and they deal with land use. So they basically help kind of organize and plan and deal with sort of the regulatory framework of cities that control, what can be built where, and sort of do that and come up with, maybe they're focusing on the downtown. And so they have a lot of say over the land use regulations in a city. That's one thing that planners do, but that's not the only thing. That's just what sort of the typical planner will work for a local government. And they're often the person at the counter when you want to get a building permit. Those are often planners, and also people who work in code enforcement and other. But they'll do things like, say if you want to, put in an addition to your house, so they're going to work with you on making sure you meet all the regulations. You're not breaking the zoning rules. But then other planners do things like transportation planning. They do economic development. Some work in nonprofits. We have lots of consultants doing design and development planning. Some work with engineers. A lot are doing green, kind of sustainability type of planning. So they're all over the place. Some go into community organizing, do more community development work.
Oh, okay.
So it varies a lot.
So we don't have any here in Champaign-Urbana. So when they decided, for example, to put all the major shopping on the other side of the highway, accessible by only a couple of streets.
Yeah. We do, but
nobody was paying attention. They were asleep that day.
It's always so tricky. I mean, you can't blame one person. I mean, planners don't have all the control. I mean, there's the politics of a community, and they may present ideas and try to encourage things, but ultimately, city councils, vote yes, no, or they make a policy, right? So it's tricky.
I imagine it is. And
Yeah.
I'm probably being unfair to.
Well, and also, it's tricky because we have Urbana and Champaign right next to each other, and they do try to coordinate and work together, but like some things don't always make sense, and it's because they're different, jurisdictions, and so they have different goals and different priorities. So it doesn't always make sense.
No, it doesn't.
And there's always a better way to do it.
So if keeping what you said in mind about what an urban planner does, how would an urban planner go about trying to make this a more immigrant-friendly area? I'm not going to say community, because you're right. We have Champaign-Urbana. We also have Campus Town. So that's like three cities, three kind of distinctly different urban areas, if I can call them that, that all approach their citizenry in a different way. I'd say the university is probably the most welcoming to immigrants, quote, because they're full of immigrants all the time.
Yeah, although I would
that.
argue that.
Oh, really?
It's not always the most friendly place.
And that's where, I should actually, we're at the end of it. That clock is not very precise. we have reached the end of our half hour far as our UPTV show.
Okay.
Hello, UPTV. I'd like to thank you for coming today, and this is an interesting conversation. If you'd like to continue this conversation, we can keep going for a part 2. And
sure, yeah.
Okay. So anyway, for
I
now...
haven't even talked about all of the things I'm doing this semester with my students that I wanted to share.
I know. Okay, well, we'll get into that in a second. So you've been listening to CU Immigration Forum here on WRFU LP and UPTV. We thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.